What's up, everybody? Welcome to My Black Book Journal, powered by Act Justly, Love Mercy, where we talk about life, love, and leadership from a Black Christian perspective. Today, I have with me on the podcast Dr. Terence Lester, who wrote the book From Dropout to Doctorate, Breaking the Chains of Educational Injustice. Dr. Lester, how you doing today?
Danny, I'm grateful and I'm grieved, right?
Mm,
So I'm dealing with the duality of both of those things, and I'm sure we'll unpack it.
yeah. You started off just real talk, grateful and grieve. Before we dive into the book, Dr. Lester, I would love for our people to know a little bit more about you. Tell us a little bit about how you got to this stage in your journey, but also tell us a little bit about why you thought it was important for this time to write this book, From Dropout to Doctorate.
Yeah. Firstly, I am a husband of 19 years as of August, right? I'm celebrating that. I love my wife. My wife is my best friend, man, and we have a healthy and beautiful family. We have two children, Zion and TJ. My daughter is actually a senior, so I'm dealing with the grief of one day she'll be moving on and going to college, and my son is a freshman, man, so he's playing sports. And I always highlight them first because they are the as if we want to use scriptural terms, like the cornerstone in my life in terms of the things that we get a chance to do as a family. Um, I lead a nonprofit organization in the city of Atlanta, and we advocate on behalf of those who are unhoused and faced with poverty. And my wife helped me co-found this organization, and so we've always seen the work I do or the work we get a chance to do together as a family, as a collective mission, right? This is
Mm,
not something that I'm out here in the world and I'm just doing because I'm so great. It's no, because God has blessed me with the type of family that offers the solidarity and the support I need to show up in this world. And so I just want to lift up family first. And, you know, to really unpack your question, when I write the book From Dropout to Doctorate, I'm literally looking through the lens of a young child who was born in the 1980s, um, and I'm thinking about songs like the message from the Furious Five, right? Where they talk about like it's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under, right? Broken glass everywhere, and then they talk about people using the restrooms and the stairs, and they just don't care, and they kind of lift up this nihilism, right, about the meaninglessness and the hardship and the environment that creates the kind of social living conditions where trauma is very much present. And then they're looking at it through the lens of like what the black community is actually faced with, right? It's post civil rights, it's post Jim Crow, but we're still dealing with a lot of the residue from all of the things that occurred, right? This is the black community. I am a product of the way that this song paints these types of environments, right? I grew up on the southwest side of Atlanta, and historically, when doing research about the city, I can't help but notice the red lines that were drawn, even to this day, and how certain neighborhoods, mainly black neighborhoods, are concentrated with poverty. And there's some intention and strategy behind that, right? I grew up as a result of that. I always wondered, in retrospect, how the city was designed and how I was being impacted long before I started having educational challenges in school. And so you have social living conditions which are highly impoverished. You have the trauma from those environments. And then you have maybe social and political issues that are creating the stigmatization and the hardships for the black culture during that time frame. And I'm writing from that perspective, but I'm also realizing a lot of the barriers and the entrapments that were kind of set coming up in
mm,
this environment, and what caused me to drop out of high school, to join a gang, to make some of the more statistical decisions that could have landed me in a state where I didn't become who I am today. But brother, the power of community, right? Getting involved in church, having mentors come into my life, call out the goodness, speak the love of God into my life in a way where the Lord was able to use redemptive and restorative measures to give me access to this community that really became the linchpin and the hope building catalyst for me to become who I am today. And so that's a shortened version, but I'm writing from all of these perspectives and really honoring the struggle of my mom, the struggle of the black community, but also the redemptive hope of how community comes in and gives you the courage to stand and overcome.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I love that in reading your book, you do talk about, you go very personal, but you also go very deep in societal and how these issues came to be. And you actually started your book talking about, like you walk through this history of these issues in our community, and you're really intentional about laying out a detailed history of how these issues came to be. Why was that important to you to make sure that people, that before they really engaged in the depth of your book, they had a basic understanding of the history that has really shaped these issues around trauma, poverty, and educational inequity?
Yeah, yeah, I do a historical timeline. First, personally, it was just for me, right? Because I wanted to understand the difference between historical trauma, right, that is passed down generation to generation, and the personal trauma that I was faced with in my social living conditions. And when I started doing the history, I used Dr. Joy DeGrew's work, Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, just to try to understand how trauma is passed down generationally based upon what Africans that were enslaved in this country face with. Like she argues that, black people have never had a chance to really process, like from a clinical perspective, what we carry in our bodies and the imagery and all of the things that we've had to process and work through. Right, there's a trauma that is transgenerational. She's arguing from her perspective and her scholarship. And I started to wonder. I'm like, man, like how did this personally impact my community, and what were the challenges that were set before me, or the barriers that were set before me long before I even knew I would have potential or the ability to dream, or like what were some of those barriers that I would personally have to overcome as a young black boy and a young black man uh, to overcome systemically, right? And I wanted to set that up because when I started doing research in the 1980s and the 1990s, there were certain things that were happening, right? You had economic decline, the deindustrialization period, right? Factories were closing, leaving a lot of more urban neighborhoods without access to employment. You had discriminatory practices that the black community was facing. You had riots, right? You had public policy that was placing pressure on the black community. And then you had the residue of redlining, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although it was outlawed in the 1960s, it still persisted and concentrated poverty in certain areas that affected black people, right? It was poor housing conditions, fewer economic opportunities, schools that were underfunded and under resourced based upon the property taxes related to housing. And sometimes people don't even connect educational budgets with housing, right? Because property taxes actually pay school budgets, right? And it, you kind of start to see how this is actually showing up. And I wanted to paint this picture because as I'm writing also from the lens of a young black child who is really coming into grips with like, oh, I'm a black boy. What does this actually mean? From conversations I overhear my mom sharing, conversations that I'm having with my grandfather, noticing urban hassles in my neighborhood, the food deserts, the dilapidated buildings, the potholes, feeling that sense of divestment, and really trying to understand how is this impacting me. In retrospect, I'm able to articulate, but when you're going through that, you don't really understand how all of these social factors kind of can set you up like for a path that can be harder than some others who may have access to, certain privileges.
Hmm. Yeah. You know, in your book, I want to read something that speaks that you say want to quote you because I think it speaks to exactly what you just said. And so you say that if I know one thing to be true, it is the difficulty of navigating the extreme external and internal pressures to reach any type of academic height. The realities of urban life, with its normalization of poverty and systemic racism and violence, create an environment where trauma thrives and can be passed down from generation to generation. This trauma, combined with the personal toll it takes on the minds of children, teens, and young adults, sets up barriers even before a child comes to age. So you're talking about before a child is born, before they even have words to even speak about what they're experiencing, there have already been these systemic barriers and historical barriers that have been placed in their way. When someone hears what you just said or reads those words, how are they to respond to that? Because it can seem so overwhelming to do anything about.
Yeah. I mean, it's overwhelming to even hear those words. And the reason why is because, this particular book took a lot of vulnerability and introspection. And being a black man and, on the other side, PhD, lead nonprofit, speak, blah, 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 um, there's a sense of survivor's guilt that you constantly have to process. And the reason being is because, brother, I still drive into the neighborhood where I grew up. My grandmother still lives there. She's 93 years old. I remember my induction into faith came as a result of her taking me to a historic black church, right? I saw her faith and I still see her faith. But also, I still have to ride past the dilapidation, the divestment. I see people that I grew up with that never, quote unquote, made it out. And when I say make it out, in a sense, I'm talking about achieving what some would perceive as educational heights or, personal success, whatever people use that to define. And so, you kind of wrestle through that. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because nobody really understands what it means to watch your mom work multiple jobs if this is not your lived reality. You know, take a young child to school long before online classes while I'm sitting in the hallway watching my mother go through the process of being resilient after work, right? This is no online classes, right? I'm sleeping in the hall, waking up, wondering why my mom is doing what she's doing, but she's setting an example as a black woman and saying to me here recently, she wants to set the example that education is a pathway, and she wanted to set the standard and the expectation that you can continue to press through. Like she went on to be resilient and got her doctorate degree in clinical studies and just the resilience of a black woman and how she showed up and represented, right? But nobody knows like when I go and do work in Title One schools, I visibly see children who show up in classrooms and can't connect with the lesson because they are cognitively aware that something's different. And that something may be I woke up in a motel, my family is staying in a shelter. I did not eat last night, and the last meal I had was when I was in school yesterday. My school clothes are too big, my shoes are too small, I don't have the proper undergarments on. Like that impacts educational outcomes and a student's ability to engage with a classroom lesson that may not even speak to their existential reality, right? And it also reminds me of the importance of why we should show up, right? to volunteer in schools, to
Mm.
understand what is going on, even if it's not in the context of your own community, that may be adjacent to your community. There are problems all around us. And the question that I'm posing in this book is, how do you become community to someone who may not have the type of community needed to stand or to overcome some of the challenges that they may be faced with?
Yeah. And so you in your book, the name of the book is From Dropout to Doctorate. And so in the book you detail and you speak about dropping out and but then going back to school. And can you tell us a little bit about that journey for you? Like you dropped out, you went back and you decided not to get a GED. Why did you decide to go the route that you did instead of getting a GED?
Yeah, I mean, when we look up the history about a GED, obviously it was included in the GI Bill to give veterans an opportunity to access education. Largely, when we look at that bill when it was first released, historically, Black veterans was left out of a lot of that access to education, access to equitable health care, access to housing, right? And it wasn't until later that the GED was expanded to include, black folks, right? But then once we were included to be able to access that type of education, it was then stigmatized, which is why I'm also looking through the lens of the 1980s. To get a GED during that time period was to be considered less than, right? Or you can't complete the normal or traditional path through education. Sometimes employers would not even hire you if you had a GED and you were black, right? And so that was problematic. My mom knew that, and she would always communicate to me, you have to figure out a way to get your education. And so I dropped out of high school. I went back as a fifth year senior. And with the advocacy of my mother, she somehow got me back into school. The correct term is fifth year persister, right? I'm back in school, fifth year senior, most embarrassing time of my life. But my mom communicated, and she always said GED wasn't a route. Now, I'm not knocking people who use that as an opportunity now. I'm just saying that back then, in my conditions and in that environment, right, in that cultural setting, like I opted to go back and do the traditional route. And so when I get back in school, I was taking a 10th grade geometry class with Miss West as a fifth year senior. I'm walking in and out of class. I'm still faced with a lot of the social trauma that I was experiencing. And Miss West pulls me aside one day and she says, stay after class. I stayed after class. And she looks at me. She says, I want you to know that you're young, you're black, you're brilliant. And I want you to use my classroom as a sanctuary, right?
Mm.
She had no context about all of the things that I was facing, some of the challenges, but it was her proximity to me and having a trauma informed
Mm.
approach to care and to her pedagogical approach to engaging me that became a form of community that I needed, where I found courage to continue to persist with my classes, and I eventually graduated. So, to answer your question, I think one of the reasons why I was able not to do that was, me encountering older black men like the YMCA when I had a brief moment of experience of homelessness, and I got the history about, what I just shared about the GED, because he wasn't able to access that, and then my mother's advocacy, right? But also on the flip side of that, having educators who was practicing what is more notably used now is trauma informed care. Like, how do we uh, move past asking people what's wrong with you to a question of like what happened to you, because that creates the type of invitation where we can serve, and it just doesn't extend to teachers, it extends to communities of faith, faith-based organizations, and the way that we approach those who may have more challenged paths or more things to overcome as it relates to the types of environments and the things that they experience while they're navigating through their educational pathways.
Hmm. So you speak about community, and what can churches and community centric organizations do to be more trauma informed? And even when you think about the education system, how can we ensure that our educators have that trauma informed pedagogy that you spoke about?
Yeah, um, that's a loaded question, right? I think it starts with understanding 4 R's of trauma informed care, right? And I want to also name that trauma informed care is different from a trauma informed pedagogy. Trauma informed care is more of a term that originates in the clinical field that it is aware of that there may be people who have faced severe forms of trauma or they are trauma survivors, right? And so it centers on these ideas that we need to provide safety, space to trust, some type of collaboration, forms of empowerment, and then being culturally responsible and aware of how trauma might impact individual or like a group or a community. And trauma informed pedagogy builds on that, right? It's like I'm aware that people or a community may be faced with heightened levels of trauma, but when I incorporate that in my teaching, right, or my educational practices, like I'm aware that something that I may talk about may trigger someone. I'm aware of the things that I design in my curriculum and how it may be exclusive, right, or inclusive, which is really good, and how implementing these types of practices actually help to create that safety and that trust that I was just referring to. And so, research, there are 4 R's as it relates to trauma informed care is realize, recognize, respond, and resist re traumatization. And it's, going from realizing, like, just understanding that trauma is widespread and that a person may experience it in a way that may not even be your own experience. Recognizing is more of like being able to understand the symptoms and the signs. And so, like, I remember one time when I would go to school, I would be labeled for falling asleep in class as a troublemaker, but the teacher did not have the full understanding of why I was falling asleep, right? Maybe the night before I went to school with my mom, right? Because she was working hard, extra, like outside of the normal pattern of what somebody may deem as normal or, normalized of going home, eating a meal, and then going to sleep, right? Uh, if a teacher doesn't understand that this could be related to something deeper or understand this, there's a story behind the student, then we can misinterpret, mislabel, right, what a student may be faced with. And then the response, right? We have to understand, like, what are the policies and procedures that we need to have in our church setting, in our organization setting, in the ways in which we respond practically to those who may have heightened levels of trauma. And then this resisting re-traumatizing someone, right? And being aware of how language may impact somebody, how what we do or what we say may impact somebody. We need to create safe spaces within the context of our organizations. And then greater than that, I just think, it's just certain things that we need to consider. Churches can create programs where they're tutoring students, right? Most churches only use sanctuaries twice a week, right? To
Mm,
practice for
yeah.
choir or, song, a worship song, and then on Sunday mornings, right? While, rethinking how we use our spaces, right, that we're already paying rent for as multi-purpose facilities, right? How can we engage the community outside the normal rhythms of worship, right? Creating scholarship programs, even looking in depth of what our congregation has to offer. What type of assessment can you do? Do you have more lawyers? Do you have more doctors? Do you have more educators, right? Really tapping into the already existing gifts that God has placed in the congregation, and then asking the question, how can we, right, as a collective, as a body of Christ, actually serve and meet the need that may be around us, right? Really engaging in this empowerment model, and suggesting that we have something God can use to actually
Mhm.
empower those who are around us. And then not even thinking just about what we're doing, but also realizing what gifts and talents may already exist in the community around us, and how can we fan those flames, because oftentimes we take a more patriarchal position, or a paternal approach to serving community, right? I think it's the both and of how can I walk with you, but how can I also empower what you already have, to empower you to take a stand on your own. And so I think we need to be trauma informed, that we need to find unique ways to serve and create more communal spaces that are safe to help people process. But it's time to be more innovative in our approaches to actually practicing ministry.
Uh, it's time to be more innovative in our approaches to actively practicing ministry. I think that is a quote that should stick with us, because I interview a lot of millennials, talk to a lot of millennials, and I've seen there's been a lot of disillusionment amongst that generation. That's my generation. I'm also born in the 80s, and so what I saw was there was a belief from a lot of us that if you just get this education, if you do that, if you can make a difference, get involved in this system. And then what a lot of us learned was that that wasn't necessarily true. And so like we got involved with systems and structures and organizations, and we thought that if we could just do this, we'd be listened to and we could make this difference. And then it burnt a lot of folks out and left a lot of folks disillusioned. And so now I talk to a lot of people who are trying to pick up the pieces to now think about, how do I heal, but how do I innovate? And in your book, it is very clear that you've excavated your story, that you have taken time to understand how your story has impacted you, impacted your family. You speak about your mother, your father, your sister, and you speak about your community. Your grandmother still lives in that community. What would you say to that millennial, to that person who is like, I know that I can still make a difference in my community. I'm not sure if I trust systems anymore to do it. What would you say to them as they're going on that journey of trying to figure out how do they spend the rest of their life making an impact, or believing again that they can make that impact?
Yeah. All loaded questions, right? Firstly, I want to acknowledge that nothing is prescriptive, and I think what you are saying without saying is that we bought into the prescription model, right? That if it worked for one generation, it will work for every generation, right? But the thing about the prescriptive model is that symptoms change, right? And we have to diagnose things differently, right? And we have to treat things differently. And I think the first thing I want to say to that person who may be struggling is it's okay to name that, and live in that tension. But I think the thing I want to caution the person with is you can't stay in that tension, right? You can't dwell there. Be frustrated, but also ask yourself what's next. Be frustrated, but also interrogate the times and the things around you to ask what should be born as a result of the new symptoms that I see. Is it the organization that you're supposed to create? Is it the material or the content that you're supposed to produce? Is it something that is a third space that you're supposed to create to do community development? Is it the book that you're supposed to write? Is it the people that you need to go immerse yourself in their world, right? To really understand what is needed to solve the cries and the groanings of that may be embodied in that community, right? It's the both and. It's the being frustrated, but it's also to ask yourself, what can I do with this frustration, right? One of my mentors used to always say, the thing that makes you mad, if you break that down in an acronym, MAD stands for, that is the area you're supposed to make a difference, right? MAD, mad, right? If it bothers you, it's also the calling that you're supposed to make a difference in. But you have to ask yourself, what is that difference I'm supposed to make? I think the other thing too is I think we need to reframe our frustration, because most times when we get frustrated with outdated systems or prescriptions, the default response is to say there's not a way forward. But I would optimistically say that that is a great opportunity, because there's a venture there, right? It's a new canvas, right? We're saying that this painting on this canvas no longer works, but it also suggests that there's a new canvas that needs to be created. And I would ask those who may be listening, what is the new image that you're supposed to create? How are you supposed to serve the image of God, right? And people
Yeah.
that may be on this canvas, and that's at the center of your calling. So that's what I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's so important, and as somebody who's doing that, so let's talk a little bit about this. You started your nonprofit, Love Beyond Walls, and you're fighting for change in your community. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and why you decided to start that organization.
Yeah. So, firstly, I want to say I was asked here recently about why so much education, and my simple answer is education expands my capacity to serve. Education is not something that I just accumulate where I have a bunch of knowledge about certain subjects to be self-serving. Education, certifications, whatever it is, independent scholarship, it's all consumed to expand my capacity to serve. Why? Because Jesus served. Jesus, all knowing, all powerful, even said himself to his disciples that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many, right? And so if I'm following Jesus in that way, I know that growth, personal development is in direct connection to how I'm able to show up in community, show up in the world, and serve neighbor, right? And so I've always sought out, growth and development as a way to ask myself, how can I use what I've acquired to serve those around me, right? And when I overcame a lot of my struggles, I was thinking and dreaming about a way I could serve the community. And I had a mentor early on, Mr. Moore. He would always say, well, God one day might use your testimony or your story to actually serve those who you can identify and relate with. You know, PhD, but I'm going to the community every day. It doesn't matter about that. That gave me an opportunity to understand system structures, public policy, to be able to articulate myself, walk into certain rooms, advocate, pass the microphone if I have to the community members whose voices are silenced. But it's all tools, right? Tools to do
Yeah.
what? To serve. And so I started the organization because I wanted to make sure, one, we could reframe the narrative around what it means to be poor. Why? Because I too was touched with impoverishment. I too know what it means to be stigmatized because I experienced brief moments of homelessness. I too know what it means to grow up in a single parent household and watch my mom struggle and barely make it, but also have this passion to ensure her children could overcome some of the pitfalls that could have taken our family out. I too understand what it means to be touched by the stains of of history and white supremacy and injustice and all of the things that continues to ravage and rage through communities of color every single day. I too, right? And so I wanted to create an organization that not only helps to push back against those narratives, but also create an organization that can be community centric. Yeah, we help people get access to showers and healthy foods and, access to temporary housing and all of those things. But it's all because we want to build relationships with people who've been forgotten. Man, community does something powerful to the internal dignity of a person, right? It reminds a person that they are worth it. It reminds people that they are God's beloved. It reminds people that they do belong. It reminds people that, yeah, they may be caught up in a struggle or faced with impoverishment or homelessness, but it's temporary, and they have a community of people that are going to walk with them through it, right? No matter how long it takes. And so, yeah, we help people reunite with family members, recover identification cards, maybe open bank accounts or whatever it may be as an organization. We build community hubs in Title I schools. So those students, right, that I named earlier, who may walk into a classroom and don't have their clothes washed in this community hub, have access to washing machines, and their families can go in without shame and actually do laundry. So their child can show up in the classroom to connect with the lesson without the stain of shame. So, like, man, it's all about all of these vehicles. It's relief and development, but it's more about being in community with people and reminding people that they are the beloved of God. And I love something, that is oftentimes quoted, that we don't necessarily have the power to give anybody worth, right? Or dignity. The only thing that we're responsible for is affirming that, right? And I think that is the power of community. And so when you ask me why start organization, why do all of these things, it's because I know what community did for me, and I want to become that community to someone else. And I want to use education as a tool. I want to use my call as a tool. I want to use the thing that God places upon my heart as a tool. Whatever is at my disposal, I want to use that as a tool to show up in community and make sure people are loved.
I want to use as a tool to show up in community to make sure that people know they are loved. And I think that's what it means. I love the encouragement. I love the story. I love that you talk about what that love looked like in your life, even through the most challenging and difficult moments. You could tell you did work to see, and this was love in some real and very difficult and challenging ways. You speak about a coach who had an impact in your life early on, the leadership lessons that you learned, your teacher, mentors who shaped you. And so as we close out this episode, I think that it is important that we acknowledge, while there is so much brokenness that exists, there's also so much beauty that exists as well.
Yes.
And you've been able to acknowledge both the brokenness and the beauty, and see the call of Christ to engage in both. And so thank you for that. Thank you for your words and the wisdom that you've written, but also have shared with us today. Before we get you out of here, 2 questions. One is, this is kind of a practice that we have on My Black Book Journal. What are you reading currently that's bringing you joy? Something you're reading currently, or something you've read recently that's brought you or bringing you joy?
Yeah. If I could pull it up here, it's a poem. I've been reading this poem every single day in the morning, as a practice, and it's a poem that's actually found in my book, and it's called "Cause I Ain't Got No Pencil." I'm reading books and all of those things, but like poetry and prose. Like sometimes I read poetry, but it's inspiring, but it's disturbing, right? It's a disturbing inspiration, if I can define it as that. And it was written by Joshua T. Dickerson, and it goes this way. I woke myself up because we ain't got an alarm clock. Dug in the dirty clothes basket because ain't nobody washed my uniform. Brushed my hair and teeth in the dark because the lights ain't on. Even got my baby sister ready because mama wasn't home. Got us both to school on time to eat us a good breakfast. Then when I got to class, the teacher fussed because I ain't got no pencil. Right? So much complexity to that. It shows need, it shows struggle, but it also gives an invitation to show up with calling. And um, I think that is disturbingly inspirational because it's reminding me every day, amidst everything that's going on in society, that struggle is still present, and um, we have a call to continue to show up, to be hope, to be light, to be salt, to be good news to people who may have it worse than us.
Hmm. Man, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Where can people follow your work?
Yeah, if you want to look up the work we're doing organizationally, you can visit lovebeyondwalls.org or all social media handles at Love Beyond Walls. Or if you want to look me up, TerenceLester.com, or I'm Terence Lester, all social media channels. That's IMTERENCELESTER.
Dr. Lester, it has been a privilege having you on my Black Book Journal today. You all, from Dropout to Doctorate, breaking the chains of educational injustice. Go get the book. So wherever books are sold, go pick it up. It is an inspirational story. It's a real story. It's one that I had to pick up and put down, because it made me think of my own experience in some real ways. But it's also a tool, almost like a workbook that you can use that should inform your work and your practices. And I love the fact that it is actionable in very clear ways. And so pick this book up, you all. It'll be a great resource in your library, something that you should keep on your desk as you're putting policies in place. If you have organizations or if you're working with people, it will inform how you're showing up. And so, Dr. Lester, thank you so much for being on my Black Book Journal. It has been an absolute privilege.
Yeah, Danny, thank you so much for the space, and thank you for the work that you do.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, y'all. Till next time.